Hi, my name's Nerine Dorman. I'm the curator of the bloody Parchment, and I've been doing this for goodness knows how many years. Today I'll be reading from a short story that I wrote in memory of my editor, Storm Constantine, who unfortunately passed away this year. So this is a story that has a lot of meaning for me, and I'm happy to share the beginning of it with you. It took me the better part of a day to finish piling rocks on top of Johanna's cairn. It was hard labour, made harder still by the splinters of grief that brought me up short. Only yesterday she'd been well. We'd talked about extending the wattle and dab halls of the outer shrine, and this morning she was gone, slipped away in her sleep so that when I'd come into her chamber to bring her morning tea, she'd lain there, stiff and cold, her skin like wax, and her eyes staring into eternity. Johanna wasn't that old. Or rather, she hadn't been completely ancient, but she had admitted to seeing more than 60 summers, and she'd been around during the before, so she knew many things that I didn't. She'd still had hope that we would be able to claw our way out of the rubble of society, but some of the things she spoke of were so strange, so impossibly outlandish, that there was no way I could ever see people flying in the sky in metal tubes with wings, or even communicate over long distances with the tablets some folks still had. Quite dead, really. No better than black mirrors with cracked screens. I have found some of the larger ones useful for scrying, and that is about it. There had been no one to help me wash her and wrap her in her shroud. I had entwined late-blooming jasmine in her hair and painted her eyelids with kohl, the way she said the ancients in faraway Egypt used to. Thankfully, I could get her eyes to stay closed with a judicious daub of gum that we use for our bookbinding. I couldn't bear the dullness in her pupils. It was like she still saw me, despite the impossibility of the matter. I was able to heft her mortal remains onto an old blanket, which I then used to drag her out of our home, and a short way up to the cemetery, with all its little mounds and bread oven-style mausoleums. No one from the village down by the river came to help me. It's as if they knew, and would have nothing to do with Johanna's passing. It was all on me, her acolyte. Tomorrow was the holy day, and they'd come visit the shrine as if nothing was the matter. I knew this in my heart of hearts, and I was not ready to face them. What I was grateful for throughout the rest of the day was that there were stones aplenty. The farmers brought these as offerings, for we always have need for our dead. The ground here is hard, and there isn't always time to dig a grave, especially in midsummer when flesh spoils so fast. But this was late winter, and a bitter wind howled down from the crags, and one of the hunters had told us that there were still pockets of snow up on the Wolfberg. Only by late afternoon did I catch whiffs of decay from Johanna's cairn, or perhaps it was merely my imagination. I hated the thought that I covered her over with so much rock, that her body was returning to the earth, so hard, with not even a bed of soft straw. Not that comfort mattered to the dead, but it did to me. This last indignity stung me like a wasp. But I'd sooner cover her over with her new home of rocks than let the jackals and the other scavengers have at her. Down the valley, by Algeria village, they exposed their dead to the birds. Sky burials, they called it, a custom from the before, it said. The mere thought turned my stomach. The few times we'd gone downriver for trading, I'd seen their place of bones, as they called it, and never ventured close. I fancied I saw skulls leering at me from the ground, or maybe it was just my overactive imagination. No ravens would peck out Johanna's eyes, and jackals would have to look elsewhere for a meal. But the time the moon rose fat and orange, and the last light bled from the inky sky, the skin of my hands was raw and abraded, but my work was done. Johanna was gone to the arms of the goddess, and I was alone. Usually, we'd greet the night and put out the lamps in the shrine and close the doors of the goddess's sanctuary. But for the first time in years, decades perhaps, no one had opened her home for the sun's first light. I was too tired, too sad, and too numb. I hadn't even been able to cry. Oh, we'd called upon to offer last rites for our villagers. In my 16 years, 12 of which I'd served under Johanna, I'd observed 9 people pass from this world to the next. I dried their loved ones' tears, heard the heart-rending keening and sobbing as the last rattling breath was offered. I'd embraced those shaking with grief until their breaths evened out and a measure of comfort passed from one to another. Yet there was no one to do the same for me. Even Indigo, the caracal Johanna had hand-reared as a kit, who occasionally deigned to be seen around our sanctuary, was conspicuous in her absence. I'd have thought the cat would at least offer her last respects, but then again, these beasts, so beloved of our goddess, are notorious for their fickle natures, and semi-wild ones, like Indigo, even more so. My grief was a heavy rock fallen from the mountain and resting precariously on my chest, so that it was hard for me to draw breath. Any moment now I expected Johanna to berate me for not having lit the lamps or having cooked supper. Instead, I curled myself into her bed and pressed my face against her pillow, that still retained the bitter herb scent of her hair and that muskiness that was uniquely hers. Her chamber was bigger than mine, and I supposed it was mine now, along with her duties to the goddess and to our community. The immensity of it all weighed even more than that precious, precarious rock, and even as I tried to bury myself in Johanna's bedding and unwish myself from existence, I couldn't escape this new, terrible reality. If I dreamed during that first night of aloneness, I did not recall the fragments. As I awoke the next morning at the first pipings of the birds, I breathed, tangled in Johanna's bed linen, and the weight of her passing shattered me anew. And thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support my writing, I'd really appreciate it. My novel, Sing Down the Stars, has won 2 literary awards, and I'm very excited about the fact that it won the Percy Fitzpatrick Award for Children's and Youth Literature. You can pick it up at all good bookstores. Alternatively, hunt me down at Twitter at Nerine Dorman, or go and look for me on Amazon. I really appreciate the support. Thank you very, very much.